Sawadee-ka and good afternoon. Today is Tuesday, the 25th of January, 2022, and this is the English language summary of the press briefing by the Center for COVID-19 Situation Administration, or CCSA. Thank you for tuning in today, as always, and let me start right away with a short summary of the Thai briefing just now. As usual, the global and regional situation was closely monitored and assessed. Thailand placing 26th globally in number of infections recorded since the outbreak of COVID-19. Domestically, it was noted that the New Year celebrations actually did not lead to an unmanageable increase in infections as feared, which is good news, as that rate is stabilizing now. Still, we remain vigilant and encourage everyone to continue to practice universal prevention, especially with the Chinese New Year holiday coming up this Friday and the weekend. The Thai briefing also repeated a number of items that were revealed last week regarding the extension of the emergency decree to the 31st of March, rezoning, adjusted measures, and information once again on the resumption of the test and go scheme. Let me then move to clarifications on the test and go scheme and other COVID control measures and designations that were adjusted and approved last week. Since the CCSA decided on the resumption of the test and go scheme with slight modifications, as we shared with you last week, there has been quite a bit of feedback. Thank you very much for sharing your frustrations, and also thank you for sharing your relief in other cases, as well as your technical and sometimes case-specific questions, all of which are very understandable. So in an attempt to shed further clarity on the resumed and adjusted measures, therefore, allow me a bit of time today to address as much as I can some of the questions that are more of a general nature at this briefing. First and foremost, before I go ahead and do that, please rest assured that the CCSA and the government, in fact, are placing high importance on addressing all of the challenges that are inherent in resuming travel under a highly evolving situation. We thank all of our friends, Thais and foreigners alike, for your understanding through this very unique episode in our shared history, and to bear with us as we adjust, amend, correct, resume, or whatever it is that is decided and required at the CCSA meeting of those agencies who are directly responsible for all of your general safety and well-being. And your feedback will continue to be very useful for us. So let me begin then with the first clarification, which is that registration for the test and go scheme resumes on the 1st of February 2022, not travel. That means that the Thailand Pass system will open for registration at 9 a.m. on the 1st of February 2022 for interested international travelers that are fully vaccinated from any country, area desiring to travel to Thailand to register on the Thailand Pass site. So that would be the time when you can begin to register on the site for the resumed test and go scheme. And as was the case before this, please allow at most 7 days for processing. The second point that I would like to clarify today is that for those who have already received a QR code prior to this date of resumption, meaning prior to the 1st of February, you can decide to either travel with that code or register for a new one and forfeit the previous one. The choice is entirely up to you. But because 2 RT-PCR tests are now required for fully vaccinated international travelers to access this scheme, whichever code you choose, you will still be required to undergo 2 tests. The difference is that if you decide to travel on the old or previous QR code, you will be able to go to a government-designated facility for the second test on day 5 or 6, free of charge. As the decision to require 2 tests was made after your plans were made, the CCSA considered all possible options for a way not to burden international travelers with payment of the second test. But for those deciding to register under the Resume Test and Go scheme, in the context of Omicron, as it has been announced ahead of time, we do hope it is enough time for you to make the appropriate plans. So if you decide to travel under the new QR code after registering under the Resume system, beginning 1st of February onwards, you will be required to book 2 tests and hotel stays prior to departing. The third clarification I'd like to make today is that under the Resumed Test and Go scheme, the hotel that international travelers choose for your first and second test do not have to be the same hotel or even in the same province, as long as they are SHA, AQ, OQ, AHQ approved. And of course, besides all of what I just mentioned, a certificate of vaccination or a vaccine passport and a COVID-free test 72 hours before flying will also be needed. A fourth clarification is that there were also questions about which additional sandbox areas were international travelers entering the country under that scheme able to travel within for the first 7 days of stay. To repeat that information, international travelers entering the following 4 sandbox areas are able to travel within these 4 sandbox areas in the first 7 days of stay in the country. And these areas are Phuket, Krabi, Phang and the 3 islands of Koh Samui, Koh Phangan, Koh Tao in Surat Thani province. We had another set of questions for which I would clarify today, and this is the last and fifth and last clarification, is that for international travelers who have recently recovered from COVID, let me repeat the information we have shared before this regarding travel to Thailand. The procedure would be that first, before arriving in Thailand, if your pre-arrival PCR test result is positive, you would need a COVID recovery certificate in order to board the flight. And this would be equivalent to a negative result. Please do double check with your airlines for that requirement. Secondly, upon your arrival in Thailand, if your day 1 PCR test turns out positive and you have a COVID recovery certificate, the doctor will still assess your health based on, very critically, the fact that your COVID recovery certificate must be valid if you arrive to Thailand on a date that is no less than 14 days and no more than 3 months from the date of your positive test or when you were infected with COVID, as shown in that certificate. So if you had the virus more than 3 months ago, for instance, the COVID recovery certificate is invalid, and fully vaccinated travelers entering the Test and Go scheme, for instance, would need a negative test to comply. I hope these clarifications have been helpful. If you need further assistance, certainly please reach out to Royal Thai embassies around the world. Leave a comment at the Public Relations Department Facebook or call the call center for any specific cases that we can assist you with, and we would gladly do that. Let me turn now to our usual updates for those following closely the domestic situation, and that is an update on the arrival of travelers, first and foremost. We will have a slide coming up for you right now that during 1 to 24 January, the total number of 159,237 travelers entered Thailand. Of this number, the majority, or 68,478 travelers, entered via the Test and Go scheme. 63,369 entered via the Sandbox scheme, and the remaining 27,390 via the quarantine or alternative quarantine scheme. The majority of international travelers are coming from these top 10 countries of origin during 1 to 24 January, and you see that list there in front of you. Russia, Germany, the US, the UK, France, Sweden, Japan, Australia, UAE, and Cote d'Ivoire. Let me turn now to today's figures, which we are recording new confirmed cases at 6,718 cases. The new recoveries gladly outpacing the new confirmed cases. The new recoveries are 7,659 cases of recoveries, and unfortunately still logging new fatalities, but at a low number of 12 cases. Next, we have, as usual for you, the top 10 provinces with COVID-19 cases, and Bangkok is topping that list once again with 1,269 cases. And you see there the number in red, of course, an increase from the previous day, and the number in green, which is what we'd prefer to see, is a decrease from the previous day. Let's now turn to progress in the vaccination drive. Yesterday, we administered 288,356 doses of the vaccine, which increases the accumulated number of vaccinations to more than 112.7 million doses. This is bringing us now to 74.9%, around 52 million people in Thailand's population having received their first dose. 69.3%, that's almost 70%, and this is approximately 48.2 million people have received their second dose. 17.9% have received their third or booster dose. Another piece of news or information I'd also like to share with our viewers is that the first batch of 3 million doses of Pfizer mRNA vaccines for children aged 5 to 11 will arrive in Thailand later this month. And the Ministry of Education has also shared with the public the COVID-19 vaccination timeline for those children. The first inoculation is planned to begin, on the 1st of February, and the second dose at the end of the month. That is all I have for today. I look forward to seeing you again on Friday, but in the meantime, please take care and stay safe. สวัสดีค่ะ